57, and counting. In a world where time seemed to stand still, the passage of years was marked not by celebrations, but by survival. Jaqk wasn't one for birthdays. He had long since stopped counting the years, each one blending into the next in a haze of struggle and endurance. Especially not in New Hades, a city that had forgotten the meaning of joy and festivity. This desolate wasteland had a way of stripping away sentimentality, leaving you raw and weary. Today he turned 57 years of fighting, surviving, and enduring the harsh realities of a world gone mad. No cake, no candles, just the ever-present grit in his teeth and the weight of survival on his shoulders. Each day was a battle, each night a test of endurance. Still, a part of him, buried deep under years of cynicism, craved a break. A moment of peace, a fleeting escape from the relentless grind. Maybe just a few hours of quiet in Jaqk, the one place that still held a semblance of tranquility amidst the chaos. Jaqk shoved the thought aside. Dreams of peace were dangerous in New Hades, a city that thrived on despair and fed on the weak. He'd learned the hard way that letting his guard down in New Hades was a good way to get killed. Vigilance was his only ally, and trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. He adjusted the worn leather of his holster, feeling the reassuring weight of the devil, his trusty energy pistol. It was more than a weapon, it was a lifeline, a symbol of his will to survive. Its cold metal was a constant reminder of the world he lived in, unforgiving and brutal. A world where every day was a fight for survival, and every moment of complacency could be your last. A world where relaxation was a luxury he couldn't afford. In New Hades, the only certainty was uncertainty, and the only way to stay alive was to stay vigilant. Destination Jaqk. The rusty carcass of Jaqk's sandcrawler groaned and sputtered as it lumbered across the desolate plains. Jaqk shimmered in the distance, a mirage of neon and smoke against the oppressive crimson sky. The town was a festering sore of vice and lawlessness, but it offered the closest thing to civilization in this god-forsaken wasteland. And tonight, Jaqk needed a drink. He steered the crawler through the ramshackle gates, its arrival drawing curious stares from the locals. Their eyes, hardened by years of hardship, raked over the vehicle, calculating its worth and the threat level of its owner. Jaqk ignored their scrutiny, his hand never straying far from the devil holstered at his hip. He'd been around long enough to know that in Jaqk, respect was earned, not given. Strange brew. The cantina was a cacophony of noise and shadows. The air hung thick with the stench of sweat, cheap booze, and desperation. Jaqk settled onto a rickety stool at the bar, his back to the wall, eyes scanning the room. He caught snippets of whispered conversations, tales of daring heists and brutal revenge, the soundtrack to life in New Hades. What'll it be, stranger? The bartender, a hulking brute with a face scarred like a butcher's block, slammed a chipped mug onto the counter. We got rotgut moonshine and something called Dragon's Breath. Supposed to melt your insides. Jaqk grunted. Dragon's Breath it is. He figured anything that could burn in this forsaken place deserved a try. The first sip was like liquid fire, scorching its way down his throat. He coughed, his eyes watering. Trouble brewing. The Dragon's Breath hit him harder than expected. The cantina blurred around the edges, the raucous laughter morphing into a distorted echo. Jaqk shook his head, trying to clear the fog creeping into his brain. He should leave, now. But his limbs felt heavy, his reflexes sluggish. He'd been drugged. A group of men had gathered near the entrance, their eyes fixed on Jaqk with predatory intensity. They were locals, their faces etched with the harsh realities of life in New Hades. And they were closing in, their movements deliberate, their intentions clear. Jaqk struggled to focus, his hand instinctively reaching for the devil. The first blow caught him off guard, a fist connecting with his jaw. The impact sent a jolt through his system, momentarily clearing the fog. Jaqk reacted instinctively, years of honed reflexes taking over. He ducked under a wild swing, his fists slamming into the gut of his attacker. The cantina erupted in chaos. Chairs clattered, glasses shattered, and the air filled with the sounds of grunts and curses as Jaqk fought back against the onslaught. The dragon's breath was a searing poison in his veins, making his movements sluggish, his vision blurry. He traded punches and kicks, adrenaline fueling his every move, but he was outnumbered, outmatched. They were younger, faster, fueled by a desperate hunger that Jaqk knew all too well. He stumbled back, crashing against the bar, his vision blurred and his head spinning from the impact. The room seemed to tilt and sway, the cacophony of the brawl around him fading into a dull roar. His fingers closed around the cold steel of the devil, the weapon that had saved his life more times than he could count. It was a relic from a bygone era, a symbol of power and fear. The familiar weight of the weapon steadied him, gave him focus. It was more than just a tool. It was an extension of his will, a conduit for his resolve. "Back off!" he roared, his voice hoarse but laced with a dangerous edge. The words echoed through the bar, cutting through the chaos like a knife. The attackers hesitated, momentarily cowed by the sight of the weapon. Their bravado faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. Jaqk used their hesitation to his advantage. He moved with a speed and precision born of countless battles, his actions a blur of calculated aggression. He fired a warning shot, the energy blast searing a hole in the ceiling. The deafening sound was a stark reminder of the weapon's destructive power. The deafening blast echoed through the cantina, silencing the brawl. The once rowdy crowd fell into a tense, uneasy silence. "Next one comes any closer," Jaqk snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Gets a face full of devil's breath." His eyes burned with a fierce intensity, daring anyone to challenge him. The threat hung in the air, heavy and potent. It was a promise of violence, a declaration of his willingness to do whatever it took to survive. The attackers exchanged uneasy glances. They were a motley crew, driven by desperation and hunger. But even they knew when to back down. They might be desperate, but they weren't stupid. The sight of the devil in Jaqk's hand was enough to give them pause. Slowly they began to disperse, melting back into the shadows, their hunger momentarily sated. The tension in the room began to ebb, replaced by a wary calm. Jaqk watched them go, his breath ragged, his body throbbing with pain. He knew this was just a temporary reprieve, a brief moment of peace in the endless struggle for survival. He'd survived another day in New Hades, but he knew the fight was far from over. Each day was a battle, each night a test of his endurance and will. In this forsaken place, survival was the only law, and Jaqk was determined to live by it, no matter the cost. He stumbled out of the cantina, the cool night air a slap in the face. The world spun around him, a dizzying carousel of lights and shadows. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the ground beneath his feet felt like it was shifting. His head pounded, his vision swam, and every muscle in his body screamed in protest. The sandcrawler. He had to get to the sandcrawler, but first he needed to clear his mind, to focus. He leaned against a wall, the rough texture grounding him momentarily. He had to get to the sandcrawler. It was his only way out, his only chance of escape. With a deep breath, he pushed off the wall and started walking, each step a battle against the fog in his mind. He weaved through the labyrinthine alleys of Jaqk, each step a monumental effort. The narrow passages twisted and turned, a maze designed to confuse and disorient. He stumbled over uneven cobblestones, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The town felt different now, menacing, predatory. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and every sound was amplified in the stillness of the night. He felt eyes on him, watching, waiting. The once familiar streets now felt like a trap. Finally, he reached the outskirts where he'd left his vehicle, or so he thought. The lot was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the city. He scanned the area, his heart pounding in his chest. The space where his sandcrawler had been parked was empty. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He walked to the spot, hoping against hope that he was mistaken, that his eyes were playing tricks on him. Panic surged through him, cold and sharp. He'd been played, drugged, jumped, robbed. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He clenched his fists, trying to control the rising tide of fear and anger. The devil was still in his hand, but the rest of his meager possessions, his ride out of this hellhole, were gone. He looked down at the small item, a bitter reminder of his vulnerability. It was all he had left. He scanned the horizon, his vision blurry. The world seemed to tilt and sway, but he forced himself to focus. He had to find a way out, to get back what was taken from him. In the distance, he saw it, a plume of dust rising in the crimson twilight. They were getting away. His heart sank, but determination flared within him. He couldn't let them escape, not without a fight.
Keep quiet, please. Quiet.
Rage, pure and potent, surged through him, banishing the last vestiges of the drug. They might have taken his possessions, but they wouldn't break him. He wouldn't let them. Jaqk Korojan might be 57, might be alone in this godforsaken wasteland, but he was still alive. And he'd be damned if he'd let a bunch of scavengers steal his last shred of dignity. He tightened his grip on the devil, a grim determination settling over him. He had a long walk ahead of him, a long walk and a score to settle.